What is going on, guys? Lawson here. Today we're gonna break down some tips, some hacks, whatever you want to call them, to make you a better saltwater fisherman. Just things I have learned from being out in the water every single day. Cranking right along in our 30-day challenge. So unfortunately today my truck is in the shop. Had to get new brake pads on it, so I'm not able to get out on the water to fish in this morning, but I still want to make some videos for you guys, and I don't do it super often and get the chance to sit down at home and really talk to you guys and give you some information, because when I'm out in the water, you know, my head, I'm fishing, and I might give some tips here and there, but when I'm out in the water, it's all about fishing. And I will say, filming and making these YouTube videos about fishing has made me such a better fisherman. It's insane. And a few reasons why. One, I am out on the water every single day, pretty much. So you start to learn things when you spend a lot of time out on the water. Two, have an awesome community of people who will give you advice and say, hey, I've tried that before and it hasn't really worked for me, maybe try this instead. So we have an awesome community of people who are trying to help each other catch more fish. And three, one of the most fun things about fishing for me is learning and getting better and pushing yourself to become a better angler, and I hope you guys learn a lot from these videos too. So today we're gonna run through 5 to 7 fishing hacks that are gonna help you guys become better anglers, and it's just things I have learned being out in the water so much. Alright, before we get into the meat of things, don't you guys worry, not every video during this 30-day challenge is gonna be me sitting down. It just happens to be too close together because first day I wanted to announce the video, and then today I'm not able to get out in the water this morning like I said, so I wanted to talk to you guys down here, but then everything else is just gonna be hitting the grindstone, catching some damn fish. Let's hop into it. Tip number 1, have the right gear for the fish you're fishing for. Now there's a few reasons behind this. 1, having proper size gear for what you're fishing for is gonna make the fishing much more enjoyable. 2, it's going to make you a lot more successful, because when you are undergunning fish, you have a large chance to lose them, break them off, or cause physical harm to the fish by fighting them too long. And when you're overgunning fish, you slightly lower your chances of catching fish the heavier your tackle is. There's a fine line you'll find of being ethical and fighting the fish on the proper size tackle, but still having it scaled to the right size to catch fish. So for me, inshore fishing for snook and jack and tarpon, you know, fish that are gonna be from 5 pounds to 40 pounds. That perfect size setup is a 4,000 size reel and a medium rod, and that's gonna cover everything. And when you're fighting smaller fish, maybe it'll be a little too heavy for them, but when you're fighting a bigger fish, you still have a solid chance of catching them. Now, a big mistake I see people make is you go fishing for a bigger fish and you're throwing too light of tackle, and you know, you want to think to yourself, oh, I really love the fight. And I do too. I love the sport aspect of fishing, the fight and the jumps and just the general excitement and adrenaline rush you get when you're fighting a big fish on lighter tackle. But you can lose a lot of fish not running the appropriate size tackle for what you're trying to fish for. A perfect example of that, a few years ago, before I really started making videos, I just started kind of figuring out how to film, I went out and I was fishing for snook, throwing artificial topwaters. First thing in the morning, super hot summer day, but it was windy, and I'm just line driving topwaters along seawalls and dock lines, and I'm sitting there working on topwater, just working it right back to the boat, and all of a sudden I see this huge head weight pile up behind it and just slowly start coming towards it. And I start speeding up a little bit, and I'm not kidding, I just see the mouth of a snook open and water being hailed and the top water disappear. And I'm fighting this fish for 5-6 minutes, and I get him boat side. And I am not exaggerating, it is the biggest snook I have ever seen. My guess would be probably close to 46 to 47 inches. It literally didn't even look like a snook anymore. It was so freaking massive. I'm fighting this fish with a 4,000 size Shimano Stratic, which that's okay. And at that time, I was using a 7-foot medium rod, which is still fine. That's good size tackle. I could put a little weight on them. My line, I'm running 20-pound braid, which isn't the worst thing, and I'm running 30-pound fluorocarbon. And that's where I went wrong. I was undergunned for the potential giant fish I was gonna catch. So I'm fighting this fish for about 5-6 minutes, like I said, and I get him boat side. and I'm trying to land this fish. And I have my rod pulled back like this. I'm trying to pull the fish towards me, and he turns completely sideways, and I watch my line go across his gill plate and instantly cut. Could that have happened if I was running 50-pound mono? Maybe, but it's a lot less likely. 30-pound is super light. So now, in any of my videos, I don't ever throw 30-pound for topwaters anymore. I only use 40 to 60. That is it when I'm fishing for snook and jack. Because that one experience, I was like, that could have been the biggest snook of my life, one of the biggest fish on topwaters in my life, and it was gone because I was undergunned on leader. So you'll find that sweet spot for you, fishing the right size tackle and not being overgunned and not being undergunned, and you'll find that sweet spot, and that's what you want to fish, and that's how you're going to catch more fish. Alright, speaking of hooking big snook on topwater, something that I almost always have rigged up in my boat, whether it's 12 in the afternoon or 6 in the morning and the sun's just coming up, is a topwater. I almost always leave a topwater rigged up on a rod. I cannot tell you how many fish and how many big freaking fish I have caught by seeing something chasing bait, like a giant snook chasing mullet or a huge jack just hammering bait fish, and you see that going on, pick up a topwater and just sling it right in that fish's face, and they destroy it. You pull the old bait and switch on them. I've caught so many freaking fish doing that. You throw a topwater there and just slam it right where that fish is eating, twitch it a few times, and just get demolished. I have caught a majority of my big snook and big jack on artificials, even with live bait too, by seeing them eating and pulling a bait and switch and flipping my bait or my lure in where they were eating. And you don't ever want to be caught with your pants down and see this fish eating and be like, holy crap, I need to tie a topwater on right now, because by the time you tie it on, you're screwed. It's too late. You're done. Alright, a little tip here that might save you some cash flow. Mono versus fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon, a little bit thinner diameter, and you get more strength resistance out of it most of the time. But if you want to know what this costs, this is a spool of 60-pound monofilament, and it costed me $7. This is a spool of 20-pound fluorocarbon, and it costed me $27. So, huge price difference, and when you start buying a lot of leader, you're gonna watch your bank account freaking dump. So, I started using mono a lot more than I ever did before the past year or so, because I'm fishing so much, I'm using leader material all the time, and I'm just like, oh man, dude, I cannot spend more money on leader. I just can't afford it. And you always growing up, you hear like, you gotta use fluorocarbon. I almost only use fluorocarbon now when I'm specifically fishing for a fish that is super heavy sight oriented. If you are down fishing for bonefish, or maybe you're sight fishing grass flats for redfish, yeah, use some fluorocarbon, use some really light lines, some 15, 20-pound fluorocarbon. That's gonna be very, very hard for them to see. But when you're watching my videos, when I'm fishing for snook and jack, 90% of the time, I'm using 40-pound monofilament that costed $8, and it's 300 yards of 40-pound monofilament. Also, side note, when I'm throwing a topwater, it is always on monofilament, because monofilament floats. Fluorocarbon sinks, monofilament floats. And so there is a note too behind that. So if I'm throwing a bait that I want to sink down fast, so maybe I'm throwing like an artificial shrimp or like a small sinking bait right here. Like this is a DOA bait buster. This sinks really slow like that, and it gets to the bottom, and I'm bouncing it off the bottom. If I'm throwing something like this, I would prefer fluorocarbon because it's going to sink a little bit faster and it's going to be a little less visible. Throwing a topwater or a glide bait, something I'm moving quick, put that freaking mono on and start ripping. I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference, and that will save you a lot of money over time. And to be honest, fluorocarbon is great, but it can be highly overrated. Ooh, we are moving right along. Number 4, 3, 5. I don't know what step we're on. It doesn't matter. Just picked up this bait and was talking about this. This seems like a perfect time to say this. Realistic baits aren't always the answer. Sometimes a really weird looking bait is gonna be the better solution. So right here we have 2 mullet profiles. One hyper realistic with the live target mullet, looks super nice, super realistic, and then 2, we have a DOA bait buster. Both are trying to imitate a mullet. I assume this is trying to imitate a mullet. It's trying to just imitate a whatever fish. But a lot of times this realistic option isn't gonna help you out. Now, when do I like to throw realistic baits? I would say the clearer the water is, the more realistic I go. The fish can see your bait better, and he's gonna see something that looks kind of wonky and be like, wait, hold up, what is that? So when the water is very clear, I like throwing this. And that's not to say that this won't work in dingy water, it absolutely will, but the clearer the water is, that's when I like to get more realistic. There's a time and place to throw a crude imitation like this bait buster right here. Right now, this time of year, it is the mullet run. The mullet are popping off, they're going everywhere, and I'm not kidding, I've thrown this so much because I'm like, mullet run, this is the most perfect mullet imitation of any bait I've ever seen. I will say that straight up. I do not catch fish on that thing this time of year very much at all. What I do catch fish on is things that look like mullet but aren't colored like mullet. So if you watched my last video I posted when I was fishing with the Guggen baits, I'm throwing a freaking 6-inch, it's called a trench hog. It is a green watermelon creature bait, and I'm throwing that and jack are crawling out of their skin to try to eat it, because sometimes when there's so much bait and so much forage, the only thing that's gonna stick out to these fish is something that looks completely different. You have people will tell you all the time during the mullet run or when they're fishing for tarpon along the beach, when there's thousands and thousands of bait fish, they're not gonna hit that identical mullet replica, or maybe they eventually will, but you're playing a huge game of odds there. You're hoping, okay, maybe they'll choose my mullet out of the other 50,000 mullet that are right there available to them. When you throw something that's kind of unrealistic in there, or that looks a little wonky, or maybe it's off colored, like yesterday I was throwing that green bait and they were crushing it. Doesn't look the same color as a mullet, but it's swimming like one and it looks different, and their eye's gonna key in on it and they're gonna go, oh, I can recognize that. I can pick that out of a crowd and I'm gonna try to eat that. You live bait a mullet and you pitch it up into a school of bait, yours somehow magically gets picked out. It's because your mullet is the one that's struggling the most and he's gonna stand out the most. So with artificials, you're trying to do the same thing. You are trying to stand out when there's a ton of bait. There's other times where you're trying to stand out and the fish won't eat anything that isn't hyper realistic, it doesn't look like exactly what they're eating. That's what you're gonna figure out in the water. So if you're out there and you're throwing something like this that's really realistic and you're not getting bit, put something wonky on, dude. Throw something that's gold, throw something that's bright yellow or some chartreuse in it. Throw something weird and you might just get a change of luck and you might start catching fish, because your bait is gonna stand out and you're increasing your odds by basically taking yourself out of the game of looking like a bait fish. All right, the next tip for you is fishing the conditions, not always fishing the fish. And what I mean by that is some days the fish, you know what, side note of that. Something quick note, master your knots. I don't know if you noticed right there, I'm just being a little pretentious dill hole. But I sat there and tied this knot really quickly, well, not really thinking about it, didn't look at it, and was just talking to you guys. You need to master your knots because you're gonna save a lot of time. You see something busting up some white baits or something like that, but you don't have a twitch bait or something that imitates a pilchard or a greenie really well on. If you know how to tie your knots really quickly, that makes a difference between throwing on that fish in 15 seconds and throwing on that fish in a minute and a half. And the odds are you get on that fish in a minute and a half later, he's gonna be gone and moved on. Being able to cut and retie your baits really quickly can make such a huge difference. So learn a few knots, learn some leader knots, practice your terminal knots. So with terminal knots, I mean tying a lure to the end of your line. Practice those, learn how to do them really quickly so you can be fishing as fast as possible. Boom, done with that knot. Learn how to do them as quick as you can. Practice your leader knots when you're sitting at home. Seriously, my FG knot that I tie, how I learned to tie that fast, I can tie an FG knot in probably 45 seconds, is because when I was sitting at home trying to learn it, I was watching TV, Netflix, whatever, and I would sit there and have a piece of braid in my mouth, have it hooked up to a rod, and I would sit there and practice my FG knots in my room while I was watching TV. Why the heck not? And that's how you're gonna learn, and that can make a huge difference. Okay, what I was gonna say before we went on that tangent about knots. Fishing the conditions, not necessarily the fish. I look at the tide chart before I go out and I see that it's gonna be high tide at 7 a.m. right when the sun's coming up. So in my head, I need to make a mental note, okay, where is the best place or the best conditions for me to fish for a snook? So you learn where they're gonna be and what the conditions dictate to where the fish is gonna be. So you learn the patterns of the fish and you fish their conditions that are present to you, and that's where the fish are gonna be. So I go out at high tide, 7 in the morning. I know I need to be fishing up shallow, whether that's near seawalls or near the edges of mangroves, because at high tide, bait pushes up against the walls, bait pushes up in the mangroves, and that's where the snook are gonna be. Say I go out and it's low tide in the morning, and I think, okay, it's low tide, there's not really a lot of water around walls, there's not a lot of water around the mangroves. Where do I fish? You're either gonna wanna fish drop-offs of sandbars where those fish might naturally be on high tide in the walls. They might just be there, but they might be 4 feet down now. Or you need to think, okay, they're not on the walls, they're gonna be on deep structures. So they may be holding around bridges or deep dock piling and stuff like that. Learn to fish the conditions, not necessarily the fish, but the conditions are gonna tell you where the fish are. Ooh, baby! Last but not least, it's a twofer right here. Don't be lazy when you're fishing. Just don't do it. There can be a difference between grinding it out and giving up. And if you are just sitting there throwing because you basically said, I'm dead inside, I'm just gonna keep throwing, I'm gonna throw the same thing, I'm gonna throw the same leader, I'm gonna fish the same area, and just keep going. Grinding is different to me. It's when you're doing something very similar where you're just throwing your heart out, but you're still thinking, the cogs are still turning, you're saying, okay, well maybe I need to lighten up my leader. Maybe I need to change baits. Maybe I need to fish a different area. A lazy fisherman rarely ever wins. So don't be afraid to cut and put new baits on. Don't be afraid to tie a different size leader on. Don't be afraid to try new spots. Just don't be lazy, because you're not gonna catch fish being lazy. And last but not least, don't be afraid to strike out. Don't be afraid to blank. So when I was really getting into fishing, I was probably about 17 or 18, and I had this weird thought in my head where I was like, if I go out and fish and I don't catch a fish, I am a failure. I'm a loser because I didn't catch a fish that day. And so for a period of like 4 or 5 months, I would go out and I would throw whatever I knew would work, or I'd throw like the smallest, simplest things. Or I would be like, I'd go out and I'd throw like a really little jerk bait or like a little topwater, like smaller size, because I was like, okay, I know if I go out and throw this, I'll probably catch a small jack or I'll catch some small snook. And I got so caught in this mindset of, okay, if I go out and I don't catch fish, then I'm a failure. Over time, I'm fishing for a few months and I'm like, man, I haven't caught any big fish in a while. Like, I wonder why I haven't caught any big fish. It's like, because you're being a dumbass and you're throwing tiny little baits and you're not really trying to catch big fish and you're playing it too safe. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to not catch fish, because when you go out and target big fish, you don't always catch them, man. That's just the sake of what's going on. You don't always catch big fish. It's more commendable to me, someone to come up to me and say, we went out and we're really trying to catch a snook over 40 inches, it just didn't happen. Then someone come up to me and being like, oh, well, I went out in the dock lights and I threw live pilchards or something little and I caught 15 snook that were 12 inches long, 15 inches long. I'm like, that sounds really fun, but I know who worked harder for fish. And maybe they didn't catch that fish, but I know who was working harder trying to catch a big fish. Don't be afraid to strike out, because you're gonna learn so much about targeting big fish the days you don't catch fish. And then that moment when you go out one morning and you're throwing a topwater, like that big 5-inch topwater that 25-inch snook isn't gonna eat, but you're throwing it, and you watch a 35, 36-inch snook come up and just shotgun blast your topwater, and you're hooked up and you land that fish, you're gonna be like, hell yes. You're not even gonna remember the past 40 snook that were under 30 inches that you caught. You're gonna remember that one big fish. So don't be afraid to strike out. Woo! Alright, sorry for the pep talk. I just get so stoked on fishing, it's unreal. This is what excites me. This is what gets me going, Hopefully some of this stuff helped you. I know it was a lot of rambling, but I'm not kidding, I wrote down like 5 ideas on my notebook and then it was just going off on it, because I have so much that I want to share with you guys, and hopefully some of this helped you. And if you guys have some tips that you think that other people are going to find helpful, comment those below. Maybe I'll find them really helpful, and I know another viewer might find them super helpful as well. Or maybe it's opinions that you don't agree with me. Maybe you have a different opinion about mono and fluorocarbon. Maybe you think it's stupid that I leave a topwater tied on all day. Maybe you think it's dumb that I think that sometimes a unrealistic bait is going to work 10 times better than a realistic bait. Let me know those things. I want to know them. So leave those comments below. Leave comments trying to help other people, things that might help me. I just appreciate you guys so freaking much. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. We are cranking right along in our 30-day challenge here. Tomorrow morning, already got it planned, do some fishing. Lots of stuff is coming up, tons of content for you guys. Make sure if you enjoyed the video, if you found any of these things helpful, leave a like on the video. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell, and that will keep you up to date whenever I post a video. Damn, I appreciate you guys so much. I am obviously super fired up and just so excited to be putting out more and more content for you guys. I appreciate you. Until next time, see ya.